New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hello, hi, I am Bonnie Morgan Gonzalez, your doula for grief. I am a registered nurse, a grief coach, and a spiritual practitioner, a religious science spiritual practitioner. And I'm just here to welcome you back to another episode of your Doula for Grief. And if you're returning, I thank you, I thank you, I thank you, because I know that you're helping us, not just me, but you're helping us as a society move toward embracing grief into our lives and accepting it, because grief definitely is a human experience. And as I say, grief is caused by loss, and loss is experienced in so many different ways. So know that if it's not grief around loss of a loved one or a physical person in your life, that it could still be the loss of situation or hope or dreams. I'm hearing so much from people that are in grief around their pets, feeling that that's definitely an area that's not understood. So I am here as your cheerleader and champion to move grief into the spotlight of our lives, and just learning to heal together, accepting what is together. And I am super excited for today. We have a wonderful guest, Chaplain Kathleen Flynn, who is going to talk to us and share some excerpts from her upcoming book that's going to be released this fall. And the title of her book is Let's Get Real About Grief. And I thought, wow, that really speaks to me, doesn't it? And I hope, and I know that by the end of this interview, you're going to be ready to go out and get that book and make it a part of your library. I wanted to say there was one thing that I was asking Kathleen prior to today, just asking her, I said, Kathleen, what is the one thing that you would want people to know about? What is the one thing? And she thought for a moment, and her comment, which I just love, she says that grief is not optional. It is not optional. So I definitely share that it's not optional, because it is woven into the fabric of human experiences and emotions. So with that said, I want to bring in Chaplain Kathleen Flynn, who has said yes to the call of being with us today. Welcome, Kathleen. Kathleen just has such a rich bio, just rich and chock full of her experience, her credentials. And I'm going to allow her to share that information with you so that I can sit and be in awe also. And then we'll move into discussing the book. Welcome, Kathleen. Welcome.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you. What a delight to be with you, and thanks for the invitation. And my bio reflects the aspect of being a lifelong learner, but also a lifelong worker. I just am not one of those people that seem to be able to slide gracefully into retirement. So this is a longer work, a longer
Well, Kathleen, to be honest, I don't know if our generation will really, I think we are painting a new picture of retirement, what that looks like. Someone referred to it as being not retired, but refired. And
refired.
I like that because we do have life experience that we've been to this point in our lives. And there's so much to do with that. And the world is in need. So I will let you continue.
Well, I think that part of staying active is actually part of the life of a minister anyway. There's this thing that a really good friend of mine recently retired after 27 years at the same congregation, and she doesn't call it retirement; she calls it rewirement. and as whatever we're doing, whether we're working in a hospital, whether we're working in with a congregation, whatever we're doing in ministry, you know, there's an opportunity at some time to be able to refine into specialties. And that's actually what's happened with me. I had a whole work career before, a whole different career before I came to ministry. And I came to ministry in my mid-50s. So I have, I just feel so blessed to have grown with and walked with such amazing people and to do amazing work, and had no idea. Although I think as I began writing my book, I realized that I was really called to do this work all my life, and my book talks about it. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself, and then I'd love to do a reading of part of one of the chapters of the book, because I don't want to just spend time reading. I want to get into a few other things.
I have lots of questions, so that'll
okay.
Some time go by.
We'll have a lively hour here.
And
talking about death, that's the perfect wording, right? We'll have a lively hour.
A lively conversation around death.
Yes.
But I did want to say before you start to our audience, please feel free to join the conversation. Drop a little comment in or send a question. Please feel free to make this a part of your hour as well. Please feel free to know that you are honored here. And with that, I see we already have Laura Topper from the UK, and she's excited to be with us. And we're excited to have you, Laura. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Laura. Well, just, great. Yeah. I love it the way it just pops up on the screen. That's lovely.
Yes.
So I'm an interfaith minister, and I'm an interfaith minister because that's was always my theology. And I started when I left Alaska in 2001. I sat behind the steering wheel of my car, getting ready to drive south through Alaska and Canada, and down to Oregon, where I was going to school. And I had plenty of time to have reflection because I had some pretty big life changes. And I remember thinking, this is a really pivotal moment in my life. And dear God, I realize that until this point, I thought that I was in the driver's seat, or ought to be. From this moment forward, I'm moving over to the passenger seat. You're now my whole world is driven by you. Where I'm called, what occurs, what unfolds in the future or right ahead of me, I feel blessed and certain and have faith that it is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And so, that was on May 1st in Anchorage, Alaska, and it was snowing so hard. So So I arrived in Oregon to go to graduate school, and parallel to that, I discovered Unity Church in Lake Oswego, and I completed my 5-year program through grad school and preparation for chaplaincy. And at the same time was invited to ministry by Unity, by my first mentor. And it looked as if I was going to do what's called a field ministry program. And for circumstances evolved, and that didn't happen. I guess it could have happened, but it felt to me like it wasn't going to work out as well as the church thought it might financially for them.
Yeah.
So here's Spirit's work. I took this into deep meditation, and I'm sitting in my recliner in my living room, which pointed right at the deck door and the little banister. I was on the 2nd story apartment. And during the meditation, I just said, whatever your will, whatever comes next is the right and perfect thing. I was really wondering about withdrawing this application from Unity at this point in time. And I opened my eyes after the meditation. Now, this is a quick response from the universe, right?
The manifestation rapidly.
Here are 2 morning doves sitting on the banister staring back at me. Now, during the course of time that I had been in the graduate program, I'd also volunteered for hospice. I did not know that morning doves meant like in grieving, mourning doves. Yeah. A lot of people think it's MOR. So that certainly caught my attention, because they weren't there just accidentally. They were there and they were staring at me. I said, okay, I get the message. Yeah. I did withdraw my application, and then another series of very spontaneous events led me to the Association of Death Education and Counseling's conference that week in Portland, Oregon, where just by virtue of 2 people sitting down next to me, I ended up being a hospice chaplain in the Columbia Gorge. I mean, it was just effortless, and it was where I was supposed to go. Yes. So I have done hospice, and then I've also worked as chaplain in a hospital in Santa Fe, the most amazing team and the most amazing hospital. It was, I'm sure you feel that same way about where you work, Bonnie. Yeah. I mean, if it's right for you, everything clicks, and it just feels like. So I also served as the pastoral care minister for Unity Santa Fe for 3 years. I've done that in 2 other locations in the Pacific Northwest, and graduated into more and more into grief and recovery from grief and bereavement. At Christus St. Vincent in Santa Fe, they invited me to put together the bereavement program. I've done that. It's well established. I'm in the final phases of handing that off to others as I am here in Ajijic, Mexico with you. And I've been working remotely ever since I got here. Just not so much anymore. But so that work, Bonnie, is being in contact with all of the families who have experienced a death at our hospital. And that's been a piece of work that has been tremendously precious. I know in hospice we do that too. We follow people, we follow families, or survivors, the grievers, for a full year. This, though, had volumes to it, and believe you me, during the pandemic, which seems to have been slowed itself down now, during that period of time, there were many calls and many very sad stories. And I'm so glad our hospital had the wisdom to have this program, because some people just don't have anybody to talk to. And then we have a bereavement program that can assist them. We have grief support groups. We do them online. We have bereavement newsletters. We have twice yearly remembrance services. So that's how we are taking care of as many people as we can reach.
Right. And as those numbers have grown, and to be able to incorporate those people, preventing people from falling through the proverbial cracks. It feels like you really have paid attention to that, because that's so easy.
Well, I'll just say one short thing here to finalize that loop. When my boss asked me if I was ready to start working on this, I asked him, because there was a whole plethora of things that spiritual care department could do. I said, why this? Why now? And this was before the pandemic. He said, because it was the right thing to do.
And
that was
wow.
That was enough for me.
That's amazing. Wow. Kathleen, all that I can say to all this divine intervention of your being guided and led, it feels like, as Laura is saying here in our comment box, she said, I love that. Complete surrender. And thank you, Reverend. It sounds like when you had that snowstorm conversation, and you said that you were moving to the passenger seat.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous faith. And it sounds to me like that's what started this driving right into your true calling. Right into your true calling.
Yeah. So, thank you. It does feel it, and again, in my book I write about it. And but I do have some things that I want to share with, specifically with ministers in pastoral care.
Okay. And if you want to go ahead and share that, and then I'll save my big question for after that sharing. All right.
Okay. Well, I was writing scenarios for, I teach Let's Get Real About Grief. I've done some teaching with Unity for continuing education for ministers. And so I wrote this little thing, and I thought it's from my own experience of being a minister, and why we should know about grief, why we should know, because sometimes we are first responders. Ministers are sometimes first responders for their congregants. They sometimes will call an ambulance, and they'll call the minister. Or it might be called to the emergency room, or sometimes it's not that rapidly. But so the scenario is that your phone rings, awakens you from a deep sleep, and the number is unfamiliar. You groggily answer, hearing tears and gasps in the speech of the caller trying to gain enough composure to share her pain. You recognize the name as a newer congregant, just moved to your area. She is trying to tell you that there's been a terrible accident and her partner is dead. In shock and disbelief, she is reaching out to you for comfort and support. And then there are several others that I wrote because they were actually all my experiences as a senior minister in responding to those phone calls. Pastoral care ministers, all ministers, work 24/7. And you're on call 24/7, unless you happen to be out of the country. And then your associate, if you have one, or your board president is. So you go. You said you had something. You wanted to ask a question?
Well, I was just listening. I was really engaged in the story of the person on the other end of the phone, and just realizing how important the work is that you do, how vital the work is that you do. And what would you say in that incident, in that situation? What do you advise the pastors or ministers to do?
Yeah, well, those conversations oftentimes have silences in them because people are crying so hard they can't speak. And if a person gets quiet on the other end of the phone, I think you just breathe with them. I've learned to do that with these phone calls I make to these families, because out of the clear blue sky, here's somebody calling to say, you know, I make these calls and I'm calling to check in with you. I mean, there was no scheduled call, and so we catch them a little off guard. And sometimes there's that silence, and you just wait, because it's going to, they're going to say something, or in a little span of time, you can say, is it something about, I can hear you, your pain. I can hear your sobs. How can I help you tonight? Yes. What can I do? And if they're close by, I know that, I just say, I'll be there. Give me 20 minutes. It's like being called to the ER in the middle of the night. So, you know, and then being present, because I found and both of these trainings, both hospice and the hospital, have made me just so much more ambidextrous, much more knowledgeable, and to understand patterns of grief. And there's a period of time, especially in sudden death, and especially with traumatic death, there isn't any way they can be present to you. They're so engaged in their grief. And my job is to hold sacred space for them until they can move through enough of that to take deep breaths, to be able to say something. The pivotal point in the ER with people, I found, is to be with them until they surface from being so inside themselves in such deep grief, until they say, what comes next? What do we do now? You know, and then I know that I can begin to talk to them about, but also be prepared that another wave of grief may come. And we have to cycle through that. You've observed this, you know, that that's the way it works. And the best thing I think we can do is be present, be a listener, and if you are asked a question, or if someone asks you for help, you know how you're going to do that. Know how you're going to, are they okay to leave alone while you leave the room for a while? If you need to go get something for them. That's the other thing. I try at first not to be too far away from them until I know that they're not going to stand up and start wandering through the halls, wondering where they are.
And I so appreciate your saying that, Kathleen, because in my experience, what I found, and it's been like an aha moment over the years, how just my presence is enough in that moment. My presence, just my presence, not even to say a word. I will hold a hand or a hand on the shoulder, but it's not that I need to say anything. It's my presence is the most thing, especially in those moments of initial shock and just the shock of realizing that your world has changed with the loss of this.
People need to be also, Bonnie, they need to be held. During the pandemic, I think probably the chaplains and nurses in the ER were probably the most vulnerable to transfer, because you can't just sit there. It depends upon the age of the person. You know, you just have to read what's going on and ask questions. Is it okay if I just put my arm around you?
Is it okay if I teach you? I do want to read another response from Laura. Thank you. She says, yes, first responders for myself. For the past year, I've been allowing grief to be my signpost for forgiveness and deeper healing. How can I fully befriend grief as a sacred teacher?
Could you repeat that question?
Sure. Okay. The question is, how can I more fully befriend grief as a sacred teacher?
Well, what comes to me is this, and there, there's some people who have written some really good instructive stuff in this field. I imagine you have heard of Alan Wolfeld.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his grief recovery work and his place in Colorado. One of the misconceptions is because the words get interchanged, bereavement, grief, and mourning get confused. What word are we using? What do they mean? Mm-hmm. And he's described something that's so effective: grief out of emotions.
Exactly. Yes.
Let that really sink in. It is a set of emotions. It is our emotional response to change, to shock, to trauma. What's unbelievable is now reality. And really, those emotions need to be respected. And he describes very skillfully that the work of moving through grief is mourning, and that there are specific acts of mourning. Crying is one of them, but it's not all. And so in his book, I mention a name of a book and a...
Oh, that's fine, and we can have a reference point.
Yeah, I'll be talking about this in my book. Understanding your grief, and this book has been around for a while. There's a workbook that goes with it. I think he wrote it in 2003, and it looks like this. Oh, this is backwards, so that's interesting. It's like dyslexic. I think I got it. There it is.
Okay.
And there's a workbook that goes with it, and he talks about the 10. He calls them touchstones, and his process through grief. And he talks about the acts of mourning, and describes that, we have to become fully aware of our grief is to acknowledge it, understand that it's a set of emotions, and then know that there are things that we can do to act. I mean, there are things that we can physically do that help us. Now, I stumbled on something that I'm going to share with you that is really powerful. Do you remember Julia Cameron, who wrote
The Artist's Way?
The Artist's Way. Well, Julia Cameron, and so in the first part of that book, and then a recent book she called Listening, which I bought, and it's amazingly good. Listening is another skill for people who are helping or supporting grievers. So she talks about the mourning pages. Well, I changed it to MOURNING, and that with our groups, that's one of the first things we talk about in the first session. You don't have to have all the rest of this down yet. You just get a spiral notebook, take some time in the morning. If you can, write 3 pages just from what comes to mind. Doesn't matter. Nobody's ever going to see them. Just keep writing. And the people in the grief support group said that's one of the most powerful tools that they have ever used. And I'll be writing about that in my book, in the chapter about proceeding through grief.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Yeah. The nitty-gritty of grief. That's what it's called.
Yes, I want to get to my big question, but I see we have another question here, and I'm not sure I'm going to get the first name right, but Christopher, mention your sickness and disease. Or do you know this person? It sounds like they're directing a question toward you. Mention sickness and disease to the right verbal doctor and get fast relief from that burden. here's various sicknesses.
I think this is somebody trying to advertise.
Something. You know what? Your information is there, and if someone needs it, please take advantage of it. But it sounds like you have something that would help illnesses.
No.
I want to go up to Laura's
Okay.
back to finishing up her question. How can I move more? How can I more freely befriend grief as a sacred teacher? And then she went on to say, grief is a set of emotions. Yes, all of those emotions can come into play when you're in grief. Someone was even a little bit surprised and saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe in the middle of my grieving I felt such joy. And they were saying that they felt joy because they finally felt that this situation that had just sucked that oxygen out of everybody's life in the family, that finally they were getting a relief, a reprieve, and they were in joy. But this feeling some guilt around having that feeling of, oh, I'm really joyous now. I can, go and do the arrangements and do different things. So yes, yes, to that grief instead of emotions. So we will. Then I'll move on to my big question. And yes, and thank you. Someone from New Thought is saying, "Oh, it's a scam." The person that.
Oh yeah, right.
So we won't advise you to follow Christopher's website. Okay. Oh yes. Oh, my big question. Yes, Kathleen. Why a book? Why a book? Why?
Oh, okay.
To write a book? That's my big question. Yeah. What was that impetus for that? What was your motivation and reason?
It's interesting. I should be able to just pop a real quick, sexy answer off to you. I felt as if this book was writing me for a long time. It's because I realized that I am a lifelong learner, and I love to put concepts together. And most of all, I have had tremendous pain in my own life from grief. And I think that to understand that other people have pain and that there are doorways through that there are ways in which we must move through it to be on the other side of it, to grow through it, and then grow into who we're becoming because of that loss. Now, I just felt that it was kind of I felt like putting a period at the end of the sentence to write all this down, to write it down, because what you opened with, Bonnie, is that I encounter so many people that have no clue about grief. They have no clue because there's no, grief isn't taught. The way we learn about grieving is from the adults that we were observing when we were children. So my generation was observing people that were probably born before 1900 and how they handled grief. Times have changed. We don't necessarily dig grave holes in the backyard anymore and put pine coffins in them. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong.
Yes.
I'm just saying that it's changed. And it's actually, in some ways, it's become so institutionalized that we are so removed from the dying that it's difficult to have ways to move through the fact that this is the new reality. There are some faith traditions that the Jewish do a great ceremony around preparation of the body. The Native Americans, I'm sorry, I want to use the term First Nation. The First Nation people have always been this way too. And they have specific ways and traditions, and the whole village gets involved. In Western society, it's become pretty institutionalized.
Yes, because we're both here in the same part of the Mexico. And there was a death of a young man that's just a block away. And just the way they handle that, everybody
beautiful.
That night, with candles, there were people in the streets at night just honoring. And the next day, there was a service that they come to go to the church, have a ceremony. Everybody gets to just come out and grieve, just together. And we both know that really true grief really starts after the funeral, after everybody's gone. But you have that initial contact. Yes,
the funeral is really the bridge. You know, it's the bridge to grief. Now, when I make my phone calls, usually people are in their 30 to 45 day window of grief. Some of them are telling me on the phone they just had the memorial, or you know, the mass, or the military burial, whatever was their way, and they're now really beginning to think about what comes next. All those have-tos have been done. What comes next? And that's the group that's most likely to say, I think I'd like to know more about a grief support group. Or they didn't have anything. There's no ceremony. There's no ritual. And the answer sometimes I get is, oh, we're doing just fine. And I want to say to them, really?
Yes. Now you want to question the just fine.
Yeah, I do. I do, because I know, even from my own experience, and I write about this in my book too, I didn't attend my father's memorial service. And it's true what a difference it makes. I was being rather arrogant. I was 29 years old, and we hadn't departed on the best of terms. And so I was being arrogant and showing my, my independence. And what a mistake I made there, because I shorted myself and I shorted my family. And now it's so many years past, I can look back and go, yeah, that wasn't a very wise decision. But of course, 29 is always not a lot of wisdom, not a lot of experience with life. So it's important to participate in those rituals. And then it's important to also, I believe two things are really, really important. Have somebody that you can talk to about the deceased that will listen to you and not give you back the, oh, time will take care of this, or some of the platitudes that are blockers to a person grieving, or maybe a grief support group, either through your church, hospital, or hospice.
If you don't have someone that you can go to seeking out. I was going to ask, when you were saying having someone that you can talk to, and being aware of where that person is with grief as well. Sometimes we can think we can talk to someone, but they just can't hear it. They really just their own experience, their own understanding of grief. They can't hear it. So I just want to offer, continue, don't stop. Don't say, well, I tried to talk to Susie, but hear you. So,
yeah, Bonnie, you're absolutely right on, because if the person they've selected launches into their own story, your grief's not being processed. It's they're processing their own grief again, and that's okay too, but it's not beneficial necessarily to you. The last thing people, and in terms of the book, I wrote stories that I had experienced because I wanted people, only because I wanted people to know that I've experienced this pain as well. Mm. And as examples, and some of my examples will show that definitely I was just moving along like everybody else does.
Yeah.
When I have a story, the story I want to read you has to do with my 4-year-old son and the loss. And when I wrote about it to let people know we all make these kinds of mistakes. Mm-hmm. And here are some other possibilities.
Right. And I hear you when you say that being a grief expert, you want people to know that you didn't just come in with an instruction manual. It was already programmed. That we as grief specialists have gone through these things. We know,
yes.
We know
yes.
And we're able to embrace the pitfalls and learn from them and move forward to help us with our own past transgressions. I'll put it that way.
Right. Yes. Well, those were learnings. You know, we learn this way. And there's so much good stuff out there for kids, for helping kids now too. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. I was going to say, I know you have some delicious, just not delicious, but some very interesting chapters in your book. And I know you said you wanted to read. So maybe I should let you read what you desire to read. And then I can make comments on the other chapter.
Okay. All right, my dear. We've got about 15 minutes left. So this is a few pages. I might just go through the story and not go into the what I have to say about the story.
Okay.
See if the parents can connect with this, or an auntie or an uncle or a grandparent. Yeah. My son was 4 when our Labrador Retriever, Mickey, was euthanized. She could no longer manage the steps into the house, much less climbing to the 2nd story. Getting up out of her bed challenged her. That too was becoming painful, and it was heartbreaking to watch her struggle. No doubt the cold Alaska winters were taking a toll on her. It was a difficult decision to make, especially in Bush, Alaska, where sometimes putting down an animal was by gunshot. I found a laboratory technician at the Alaska Native Services Hospital who could administer the pentobarbital at our home while my son was at preschool and my 1-year-old daughter napping. Mickey had been my companion through difficult teen years, truly my best friend. The pain of losing her was beyond description. My heart was broken. I did not know how to tell my son she died. Unfortunately, the way I learned about my early childhood pets' end of life was just that they were gone, like in disappeared, implying ran away. Another heartache. This one forced the truth from my lips. I called him. I must have missed something here, because what I did do was just not tell him that the dog was dead. It was like she was missing. Mm-hmm. I heard him outside calling her, and my heart broke. This forced the truth from my lips. I called him inside, and we sat together on the living room floor, where I explained that Mickey was in pain that we could not fix. That the kind of loving thing to do was to give her medicine that would make the pain go away. It would also put her gently to sleep. We knew it would end her life, and we did it so she would not be in pain anymore. She died peacefully. I told him how sorry I was that I did not tell him the truth. Now he's 4, so going into any more detail would have been way over. We cried together that our beautiful friend was now gone. For a while, he was rightfully angry with me for not being truthful with him. I tell the story only to enforce how important it is to be honest and forthcoming with children. We are their first teachers. I learned from this that honesty is far better than the misguided notion that I am saving my son from heartbreak. What our parents did or said, the way they address the needs of children is based on old values. I'm certainly not implying that everything our parents or that all parents did raising children was out of date or incorrect. Unfortunately, where loss is concerned, it's often way off base. And I see that play out in the work I do. People operating from, you have to be strong. And that sometimes is interpreted as having to be stoic.
Yes.
You have to grieve alone. That's interpreted that you go to your room to cry. The idea that we don't share about what's happening with the children. And yet that's how they're learning about death and dying and grief, is by observing us, and there's not that interaction.
They're learning about life through us, watching.
Right, right. So I really challenge people to, you're probably, for this chapter, you're probably taking inventory right now, asking yourself when the first time you ever encountered loss or grief. And I invite you to recall the first memories about death. Was it a pet, a grandparent, maybe a friend from school? How were the adults around you behaving? Did they talk to you about what was going on? Did they ask you if you had questions? How were your feelings factored into this loss situation? Now, we can say this to ourselves because we're reflecting on a time when we first learned about grief.
Yes, I am just breathing into that myself. How did I myself learn about death, grief? I'm from the South, and it was a big deal of someone's died. We all got together, and I was just a young child, but we enjoyed being with the other family members. So looking back, I can see that as a great support. But there wasn't a lot of questions that came up about what happened to Greg or where is Uncle Tom.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the key aspects about recovering from grief, or, there's the grief recovery method, and I'm trained in that method. And so actually the reference to how we learn about grief is really talked about when we're trained as specialists about how we learn about grief. The point is that that's the way we learned about it. Like I learned about it with the pets. I did the same thing with my son. We keep repeating it. Yeah.
Yes, and wow, Kathleen. That is just, it's a subject I could just ponder most of the day. Oh, so with that said, any advice to parents now? I know there's resources that are out there that we didn't have when we were coming of age or younger. It's recommendations that we may have.
I do have some. Here's the thing. We have Google now, and so resources are, I know, but in the time of our parents and grandparents, some of them didn't even have libraries in their towns, much less, to buy books or borrow books.
So some people could not read from my generation.
Exactly.
That wasn't an option to read to a book about death. So
well, and healthcare didn't invest much in that. I mean, the family doctor, and sometimes they were absolutely amazing, in understanding. I mean, that's a whole other program, the somatic part of grief. However, I encourage you to look for children for a couple of things. I know of 2 centers in the United States, the Girard House in Santa Fe and the Dougy Center in Portland, Oregon. They both have websites. I would recommend you go there because they have resources on the website. I do not know if they're doing children's groups over the internet. I doubt it seriously because the format is more art, play, children being children, and then gathering them. And there are some terrific books. Lifetimes is a wonderful book. I used it for mental health patients when I was in residency at a mental health hospital, and we had a death of a staff person. But I'm making a list. I'm putting a resource section in my book, and one will be about children. Take a look at what's on the internet and take a look at the books that are out there. You know, children don't need long scientific explanations. Yeah. What they need is to have something where they can have the conversation, and they need to know that you're paying attention to how they're feeling and making yourself available to listen to them. Oftentimes children will actually tell you more when you're engaged in a board game with them, you know, or shooting hoops with them. It might come out, you know, I mean, one comment, just listen, and they'll give you the opening. And I really believe it's important not to over-inform them. Yes. Because it overwhelms them. You know, it depends upon their age. We're starting from very little here through 12. I have written a whole section on early childhood development. I mean, it's not elaborate, but it acknowledges that children certain ages don't even understand the language you're trying to talk, and so you have to talk in their language, which is where nature is the perfect example.
They don't have that frame of reference. So what I'm hearing with children, keep it short, keep it simple, and just listen for them to ask any questions or just observe them. Just observe and listen.
Oh, the other thing I think that is vital, Bonnie, is just one thing. You don't have to hide your grief from them.
Oh, don't. Yes.
Yeah. You're feeling sad. If they ask you, you're feeling sad because you're missing your mother who just died, grandma who just died. And that gives them permission to feel sad too.
And let them see you cry. That gives them permission to cry. Yes. Kathleen, this is just a rich, rich conversation. I just want to read just a couple comments here. Laura says, such a rich conversation. Thank you. I am learning so much and so grateful for both of you and your authenticities. And she's responding to the grief factor here. Yes, I am my grandfather. I couldn't cry. And that does happen. That does happen. That you can't cry. And for me, Laura, with my own personal experience, it's really harder when I can't cry because that would be like a relief, but sometimes you can't. And so being patient with yourself. And then we have Maria Flores. And she says, please repeat the names of the 2 organizations that you mentioned.
Okay, the Girard House, that's Gerard, I think it's apostrophe S, house in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's patterned after the Dougy Center in Portland, Oregon, and that's DOUGY, Dougy Center. Both of them, I mean, there's just a world of information on their websites. Most hospice websites have good information about bereavement and grief. I know our time is short. I think I just want to say to folks, look, yes, I was 10, 47 years ago. Yeah, Laura. Oh, I know. I know. So grief support groups are available free of charge through hospice. You do not have to be the survivor or griever of someone who's died in hospice. Generally, that's the way the group happens. I like groups that educate about grief as well as surround you with the space where you can talk or not if you're not ready to.
Yes.
Look for educations of elements of education, because it's teaching you how, when the group is, so you can continue your grief work. And I like groups that begin and end in 7 or 8 weeks, and then you can start again. But the ongoing ones tend to kind of lose focus, I think.
And the energy wanes because people kind of drop out, and there's no consistency of the group, the energy of the group, because people in and out. So you're right. I like 6 to 8 weeks. 6 weeks is really, get you started. You can sign up for more. Wow, our time has just flown by.
Wow, it has.
It's just flown by. And I want to restate the title of your book. It's called Let's Get Real About Grief. And that is release date in September, I believe. Correct, Kathleen?
September 22nd, that's the fall equinox. And my publishing developmental publisher says that I can send out an announcement for there'll be early release for just the electronic copy. And I'll have more later. And could I keep you informed, Bonnie, about how that's going to work?
I would love it. And I would love for you to come back at some point. There are some great chapters in this book that lends themselves to a show. Each chapter could be a show. But
well, yes, and we can do the questions and answers from people who are listening, because that's what's on their mind. That's helpful.
Yes. Please, please send those questions in. I want to end by saying, and then I'll give you the last word, Kathleen. Just that I saw Laura was saying that she was 10, and that's been 47 years ago. And I do want to touch on one of the things that really helps with healing grief, and that's rituals. So that's another show, and we can talk about that when somebody's been gone for a long time and you feel like, I'm still there. So some rituals.
Yes, definitely.
So I just want to thank New Thought Media Network for hosting your Doula for Grief, and for having Chaplain Kathleen Flynn on. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that has watched today. And I just know that this has been helpful in whatever way your life needed. Whatever your life needed from today, you were able to take that with it. And so again, I'm Bonnie Gonzalez. I'm a grief coach, and I'm available for private coaching and grief. I do have a group that's ongoing. And so thank you. And Kathleen, I just let you have the last word today.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. Well, I'll end with what you started with. Grief is not optional. Because you're not recognizing you're in grief doesn't mean that you're not in grief. And so the way through it is into it. And get the assistance you need to walk through that. It will change the direction of your life. And people who have held their grief for lifetimes have unfortunately never had that freedom restored to them.
I am honored. I am honored.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. And come back next week. Come back next week. I promise we can continue the conversation. Any other questions or comments, please just drop an email to myself or to Chaplain Kathleen Flynn. And thank you.
Thank you.
New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.